destroying the destroyers of the earth.
Hey guys, David here, and I want to talk about the most evil on the right man in the world, George Soros, the man that Glenn Beck referred to as the puppet master, which, with him using that reference, is actually an anti-Semitic trope that's been used throughout history. George Soros is a billionaire he's the number one boogeyman of the right. And as a person who considers himself a centrist, I didn't know that much about George Soros, so I wanted to learn about him. So I read his autobiography and I watched a documentary about him. And what I came to find out is George Soros is probably one of the most villainized people in the world. But he's just a man. He's just a man. That's all he is. People like to, people that are religious love to demonize men and give them all these powers that they don't have. As somebody who doesn't believe in the dark one, I just look at the facts. And I heard about George Soros briefly years ago. And then probably 5, 6, 7 years ago, there was this meme that started circulating on Facebook that showed this Nazi SS soldier with glasses, and people was saying that was George Soros. And I remember seeing that, and I started thinking to myself, my grandfather served in World War II, and he's dead. So I was like, how old would George Soros have to be if that picture, which looked like a man in his mid-20s? So as somebody who doesn't just believe things because somebody puts it on Facebook, I decided to do a little research. And I found out that this year, 2020, George Soros is 90 years old, which means he was born in 1930, which also means when World War II started, he was 10 years old, 10 years old. By the time the war ended, he was like 14. The math just didn't add up. He couldn't have been this SS officer. And the more I read about this man and learned about this man, the more I realized that a lot of the evils heaped on him is because of his wealth. But it's funny, he's a wealthy Jew. If you're a wealthy Jew, like the Rothschilds, then you are evil. You're in league with Satan. But if you're a wealthy Anglo, a wealthy Christian, you can be president of the United States. John F. Kennedy, even Donald Trump. So I started looking into George Soros, and I found out about this thing that he started called the Open Society. And so I wanted to read more about it. And it started in 1979. And I think if you read this, you would understand how all these beliefs that you have about this man are untrue. George Soros, the founder and chair of the Open Society Foundation, begins his philanthropic work funding scholarships for black university students in South Africa during apartheid, and for dissidents in communist Eastern Europe to study in the West. His foundations fund groups and individuals in more than 120 countries. In 1984, he started encouraging dissent behind the Iron Curtain. Now, people say he's a communist and he wants to turn America into a communist country. Well, because of his money and his influence, He was one of the people that started tearing down the Iron Curtain even before Reagan did his famous Mr. Gorbachev tear down this wall speech. George Soros opens a foundation in Hungary, where he was from, which would eventually lead to the establishment of the Open Society Foundation's network. The foundations seek to expand people's access to information in Eastern Europe and Russia. Remember, they're behind the Iron Curtain, so he's trying to help them get information, including by distributing photocopiers to independent groups to break the Communist Party's grip on information. So he was the one who started to destroy the Soviet fake news message. In 1986, he started supporting democracy in China. He opened another foundation in China, which becomes a target for infighting between pro and anti-reform elements in the Communist Party. The foundation closes in 1989, just before the government's brutal crushing of dissent in Tiananmen Square. The guy standing in front of the big tank. In 1989, he fostered open societies in the former Soviet blocs. By the fall of the Berlin Wall, Open Society has established a presence in Poland, Ukraine, and Russia. Over the next 5 years, the Open Society Foundations established a network of offices in Albania, the Baltic states, Bulgaria, the Czech Republic, Kazakhstan, Moldova, Romania, and Slovakia. In 1991, he opens the doors to European universities. Just over 100 students begin studies at the new Central European universities, championed and largely funded by George Soros as a regional force to revitalize critical and open thinking. He wanted to educate people so they can think for themselves and make logical decisions. Now, more than 1,500 international students from all over the world attend CEU classes in Vienna and Budapest, many supported by scholarships from the Open Society Foundations. In 1992, he started expanding the access to the arts. He opened art centers across Central and Eastern Europe and the former Soviet Union, building on a model he started in Budapest in the 1980s, a network of 20 centers. The Soros Centers for Contemporary Arts provide information on international grants, scholarships, and competitions, organize annual local art exhibitions, and support artists' participation in exhibitions, conferences, and learning opportunities abroad. He's a champion of knowledge. In 1993, when Sarajevo was under siege, his foundation sent a team of disaster relief specialists into the city to help restore basic services. These crews, under threat of sniper fire and exploding shells, help provide residents with gas lines, drinking water, and electricity. Today, the foundation in Bosnia and Herzegovina continues to fund groups working to promote democracy, tolerance, and the rule of law in the Balkans, alongside national foundations in Serbia, Northern Macedonia, Kosovo, and Albania. In 1993, he began taking a lead in early childhood education. He launched a $100 million initiative to respond to the rapid collapse of state-run preschool systems in 15 former communist countries of Central and Eastern Europe and the Balkans. This led to the creation of the step-by-step early childhood curriculum and training program, now advanced by an independent association supported by over 80 educational groups and active in over 40 countries. I love this man. He's all about education, which I am 100% behind. In '93, he started funding research in the former Soviet Union. The collapse of the Soviet Union had a devastating effect on its scientific institutions. George Soros responded to the crisis with the launch of the International Science Foundation, providing $200 million in interim emergency support for the sector. Over a 2-year period, more than 30,000 scientists received individual grants, while about half of the funds went to support long-term research projects. In 1994, he started nurturing democracy and addressing inequality in post-apartheid South Africa. As apartheid falls, the Open Society Foundation's office in South Africa focuses on addressing injustices and creating opportunities. In a country that has systematically discriminated against the majority of its citizens for decades, the Open Society Foundation spends more than $150 million in South Africa over the next 25 years to support reconciliation, legal reform, education, public health, and independent media. George Soros makes a separate pledge in 1995 of $50 million to help the government build housing for people living in makeshift shacks and overcrowded city dwellings. This is your Satan, this man that helps humanity, uses his own money to help people. In 1994, he sought a better future for Myanmar. His foundation started providing support to democracy activists, as well as Burmese refugees and dissidents in border areas. In 2016, once Myanmar formalized a transition toward a more open government, the Open Society Foundation opened a foundation to support civil society and groups representing marginalized people to encourage a representative democracy to take root. I thought he was a communist. I thought he was the devil. He also started backing new thinking on global drug policy. He launches the Lynn Smith Center, a policy research institute dedicated to promoting a new approach to drug policy, once focused on healthcare provisions and protection rather than on punishment and prohibition. You know, he was ahead of his time. He was doing this in '94. In 2000, the center becomes part of the Drug Policy Alliance, which continues today as a leading advocate for drug policy reforms. This is something that as somebody who's lost both of his parents to cancer, I really appreciate this Mr. Soros. And he did this because of the death of his own parents, bringing end-of-life care out of the shadows. Motivated in part by experiencing the death of his own parents, George Soros launches a project on death in America. Guided by doctors, academics, and caregivers, this $45 million project makes a significant, enduring contribution over a 9-year period to the improvement of end-of-life care in the United States and shapes Open Society works on palliative care around the world. In 1996, he expanded the Open Society in the United States, formally establishing a U.S. program to guide its work. Its initial objectives include challenging a racially discriminatory justice system. Justice reform, anybody? Trump did that? Oh my God, I guess he's in league with George Soros. And the associated mass incarceration of Black Americans. Supporting reproductive rights and advocating for humane and just immigration policies. In 1998, the Open Society Foundations opened a field office in Baltimore to better understand and address education, justice, and addiction issues in the city, and create solutions, that can serve as a model for other urban areas. Today, approximately $1 in $5 the Open Society Foundation spend is spent in the United States. That's a lot of money. In 1997, the Open Society Foundation's unprecedented efforts to combat discrimination against Roma people gained momentum, with the opening of the Roma Participation Project in Budapest, Hungary. They began work to combat segregation, counter stereotypes, and create opportunities for Europe's largest and most excluded ethnic minority. George Soros puts his money where his mouth is. In '97, the launch of the Open Society Initiative for South Africa marked the beginning of a decade of expansion of work in Africa, with the creation of its first regional foundations. Based in Johannesburg, the South African Foundation today oversees work in 10 Southern African countries. Similar regional foundations were subsequently set up. The Open Society Initiative for West Africa in 2000, based in Dakar, Senegal, and an Open Society Initiative for Eastern Africa in 2005, based in Nairobi in Kenya. In 1998, he began mobilizing against tuberculosis. George Soros began funding urgent work to combat the spread of a new drug-resistant strains of tuberculosis in the Russia Federation, devoting an initial $12.5 million focused on the country's overcrowded prisons, where 1 in 4 inmates suffered from the disease. Recognizing the global nature of the threat of multi-drug resistant tuberculosis, Soros helped mobilize a response and commission the first studies to outline the scale of the problem. Additionally, he helped fund and launch the first global plan to stop tuberculosis in 2001, an effort backed today by some 1,700 organizations in more than 100 countries around the world. In 1999, he began his engagement with the European Union. The establishment of the Eurozone with its common currency and the prospect of adding additional states who met certain criteria brings the promise of a deepening commitment to advancing human rights. Liberalizing economic policies, increasing government accountability. What's wrong with that? The Open Society Foundation supported many efforts, including the creation of the European Council on Foreign Relations in 2006, to leverage the foundational promises into EU policies and practices that respect open society values inside and outside its borders. In 2001, he supported democracy in Indonesia. In 2002, he started prosecuting the most heinous crimes. The International Criminal Court, long supported by the Open Society Foundations, becomes the first permanent institution responsible for prosecuting genocide, crimes against humanity, and war crimes. Building on the work with war crimes in tribunals for Cambodia, Rwanda, Sierra Leone, and Yugoslavia, he continued to encourage a debate to understand the possibilities for and the limits of international justice, including through funding regular monitoring of court proceedings through the International Justice Monitor. He also, and all you Christians, all of you people on the right should be behind him. Trump moved the embassy to Jerusalem. Well, in 2002, 18 years before Trump did that, the Open Society Foundation gave its first grants to groups in Israel and Palestine, as George Soros expanded his efforts into the Middle East region to promote peace between Israel and Palestine. In 2007, he helped people living with HIV and TB in Africa with a $3 million grant to Partners in Health to develop effective treatments for people with these diseases. In 2008, the Open Society Foundations invested in efforts to make progress on a range of issues in Afghanistan, including establishing an independent bar association reporting on wrongful and inhumane detention operations and exposing the consequences of war on civilians. So, before WikiLeaks, George Soros was pointing out the war crimes that the United States was committing in Iraq and Afghanistan. Before WikiLeaks, before Snowden, Soros, the evil man, the devil that you all think he is, was doing the things that you all agree with. In 2011, his group helped to hold soldiers accountable for rape in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. In 2013, they began expanding work into Latin America. They began in 2013 supporting justice for one of the Central America's most murderous generals, General Efrain Rios Montt, Guatemala's former military dictator, stand trial for genocide and war crimes over systematic attacks on indigenous communities during the early 1980s. Because of George Soros's money, Montt was convicted, and it marked the first time a domestic court anywhere had found a former head of state guilty of genocide. In 2014, all of you MAGAs should support this because of the deep state. He began confronting a legacy of CIA torture. In response to legal work by the Open Society Justice Initiative, the European Court of Human Rights became the first court to publicly confirm the existence of so-called black sites, secret prisons operated by the CIA in Europe after the September 11, 2001 attacks in the United States. The ruling focuses on the role of Poland. A similar ruling against Romania followed in 2018. In 2015, the Open Society Foundations helped organizations win the 2015 Supreme Court case that makes marriage equality legal in all 50 states. The decision is one of the most significant political victories in modern American history. It also reinforces dedication to support dozens of organizations around the world that are fighting for LGBTQ rights. He also helped refugees and migrants flee war and poverty. In 2016, he began investing in economic power for social justice. The Open Society Foundations took direct responsibility for managing the Soros Economic Development Fund. The fund, founded by George Soros in 1997, invests in high-risk business initiatives that will have a positive social impact. The investment portfolio expands significantly over the coming years to over $220 million currently. In 2017, Trump wouldn't do anything to help Puerto Rico, which is owned by the United States. The Open Society Foundation invested more than $20 million to help disaster-affected communities rebuild. While Trump was throwing out his, toilet paper rolls, they also joined business and government developing a blueprint for long-term and equitable recovery. He also, in 2017, introduced, through the Open Society support, a bill to decriminalize possession of drugs for personal use, which I 100% agree with, which a lot of states are doing now. The bill also reduces criminal systems for drug-related charges, and it helps to improve people from overdosing. And in 2020, George Soros announces a $1 billion gift to launch the Open Society University Network, an unprecedented initiative to defend academic freedom and critical thinking by connecting scholars, students, and educational institutions from around the world. He also announced investments of $220 million to build power in black communities, promote bold new anti-racist policies in U.S. cities, and help first-time activists stay engaged. So there you go. There's your devil. A man who was a child, a Jew in Budapest, Hungary, when World War II and the Nazis were slaughtering and killing 6 million Jews in the Holocaust, who survived that, went on to build a multi-billion-dollar company, and now helps disenfranchised, poor, sick people without a voice across the world. This is your demon. This is the big, evil, bad guy. He's just a man that's trying to help. He's 90 years old. Someday he's going to die, and I'm sure a lot of you out there will cheer about it. But I think George Soros was a good man, and I think he is a good man. And he doesn't need me, but I appreciate all the things that he's done. And someday in history, he'll be recognized for his achievements. This is David. As always, Izzles. Have a great one. Bye.